It's crazy to think that like these dudes found a way out of the insane, the completely unjustifiable sanctions and trade embargo that they were placed under by America, the world's largest superpower, who was mad that they had a successful socialist revolution against the America-backed dictator, that they just never let Cuba. They never let Cuba have a moment.
¡Viva la Revolución Cubana! ¡Viva! ¡Hasta la victoria! ¡Siempre!
They're known as the Army of White Coats, and their medical teams have been dispatched from Havana to help at least 16 countries, including South Africa, Qatar, and Italy, battle the pandemic.
Miedo tenemos todo, pero hay una tarea revolucionaria que cumplir y el miedo se controla y se pone a un lado.
So why are doctors from Cuba, a country with one of the lowest GDPs per capita in the world, so special? The Cuban medical staff sent around the world come from the Henry Reeve Emergency Medical Contingent. It was started in 2005 by the late Fidel Castro and specializes in rapid response to natural disasters and outbreaks. Since then, the unit has helped 3.5 million people in 21 countries. But Cuba's medical internationalism goes back further than 2005 and is rooted in the struggle against colonialism. It all goes back to the Cuban Revolution in 1959, when Castro overthrew Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship and established a communist regime. Free healthcare and education were identified as universal human rights, so the country invested in its own healthcare system. But it also built an international outreach.
Illegal! This is why we can't do what? We must do everything in our power to stop this. How dare they? Why aren't they shipping weapons and bombs to other countries? Oh wait, they used to. Except the weapons and bombs and military support that they were offering to other countries were on the right side of history, and America was seemingly on the wrong side of those conflicts as well. Apartheid South Africa comes to mind. Anyway, you know.
Effort in order to respond to situations like natural disasters, as well as help other countries with their anti-colonial struggles. During the Algerian War of Independence, Cuba sent their doctors to help after French doctors left the country. Some of those wounded in the war were even brought back to Cuba for medical treatment. Such medical missions were essentially free, but they served to encourage diplomacy and help Cuba overcome political isolation due to the US embargo. Since Cuba sent their doctors to Algeria in the 60s, the countries have remained friends and allies. Today, Cuba has one of the highest number of doctors per capita in the world at 8.2 doctors per 1,000 people. That's 3 times higher than the US. But how does the country even have that many doctors? In 1959, when Castro assumed power, half of the 6,300 doctors in the country defected. So the country concentrated its efforts on training new doctors. They put in place an emergency accelerated curriculum in 1963 so that they could realize their vision for a free and accessible public health system. They also invited students from newly independent African and Caribbean countries to enroll. Academic records were not the only criteria. So was a commitment to solidarity and serving communities without access to health. The program has changed a lot over the years, but there's one.
What the f? That was crazy. Did y'all see that? That was wild. They got me. They got me. God damn it, they got me. I got hit with a CIA heart attack gun. My stream did. Right as I was about to read the one chatter who said, my wife was a doctor in Cuba and now she's in the United States, also a doctor in the United States. They are basically property of the state. Like right as I was about to read the reactionary chatter, be like, this is actually bad. You know, I love this take because, oh, there it is. Look, I love this take because this is what they say about like any kind of nationalized healthcare system as well. My wife left Cuba. She was a doctor there and now a doctor in the USA. They are considered property of the state. Yes, dude. Yes. What you're describing is unironically a nationalized healthcare system. Okay. Or rather, you subtly wanted to say you got a bad bitch for a wife, you know? Hey, listen up, chatters. I got a Latina wife who's a doctor. Like, sweet flex, man. That's cool. I'm proud of you.
Cuba's medical education system exists within the healthcare system.
My wife is a public defender in America, and in that country, they are considered property of the state. I know. Property like Marine, but not doing tough shit. Exactly. Anyway, let's continue.
Instead of teaching hospitals, there's teaching at community centers and polyclinics. Polyclinics are community-based clinics with primary care physicians, specialists, and diagnostic testing. And each clinic tailors their medical approach to the needs of that community. Medical and nursing students intern in this national system from their very first year. Today, Cuba has the largest medical university in the world, the Latin American School of Medicine, and they offer scholarships to students from around the world who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford medical school. But it's not just medical training that Cuba has succeeded at. They've also innovated in the biotech industry, partly because of sanctions. In the 80s, their doctors developed vaccines preventing dengue fever and meningitis. They've developed a number of successful drugs that help with everything from diabetic foot ulcers to HIV and hepatitis. But in 1998, Cuba's free medical missions embraced the free market. The relatively poor country realized that they could tap into their robust healthcare to boost the economy. 30,000 doctors were sent to Venezuela, and in return, Cuba bought oil from Venezuela below market prices. Cuba then set up permanent missions which the country would be paid for in South Africa, Qatar, Brazil, Algeria, and Kenya. Leasing healthcare professionals to 67 countries around the world brings in $11 billion a year. But how does it work? During these permanent missions, doctors' salaries and living expenses are paid for by the countries they're working in. But the Cuban government also gets a cut. Reports suggest that between 75% and 90% of the salary goes to the government, but the doctors still end up earning.
By the way, this is literally the reason why the American government wants to put an end to it. Yeah. It's crazy to think that like these dudes found a way out of the insane, the completely unjustifiable sanctions and trade embargo that they were placed under by America, the world's largest superpower, who was mad that they had a successful socialist revolution against the America-backed dictator, that they just never let Cuba, have a moment to be itself, a moment to recognize its autonomy, its sovereignty. And ever since then, we've just been punishing them for this crime of doing a successful revolution. And no matter what, like, they find ways out of it due to ingenuity, due to resilience, due to central control and central planning. And even then, it's like America will never stop being the biggest evil villain of all time, in spite of it all.
A lot more than they would in Cuba. But some doctors aren't happy with the arrangement and have complained of harsh living and working conditions. In 2006, the US created the Cuban Medical Professional Parole Program. It granted visas to any Cuban doctors who wanted to defect.
We just found Chatter's wife, by the way.
The program ended in 2017, but before that, it's estimated that 7,000 doctors defected. US officials have called Cuban international medical missions and modern slavery. Cuba's health ministry says this isn't the case, and the US is trying to undermine their missions and curb revenue they make to put pressure on the country. In 2018, Cuba pulled thousands of doctors from Brazil when the country's right-wing president Jair Bolsonaro called the doctors slaves and terrorists and threatened.
Yeah, Bolsonaro saying this is slavery. It's funny because, like, you know, he loves slavery. I don't know.
Threatened to cancel medical cooperation agreements. More than 8,000 Cuban doctors have been stationed in remote areas in Brazil where it's difficult to get.
Have you ever spoken about the absolute pathetic grift that is Asmongold's current content, or do you think he just saw your success and said, I'm going to do the Nazi version of that? Yes, I have spoken about it. I even briefly alluded to it earlier today. At this point, I just kind of like crack jokes about it because we've known about this for quite some time. He has been doing it for a while. He's completely restructured his content around basically being Bizarro Hasan. I shower every day. I work out every day. I am on the right side of issues every day. He is the exact opposite. I'm political. He's apolitical. I leave my house every day. I go touch grass every day. Yeah.
Brazilians to work. But the situation has changed because of the coronavirus. Brazil says it could hire back Cuban doctors that are still in the country. Dozens of other countries have also sent requests to Cuba to send emergency teams of doctors. The US says that Havana is exploiting the crisis in their own doctors and criticized countries who want to use them to fight coronavirus.
La campaña de descrédito del gobierno de los Estados Unidos es inmoral en cualquier circunstancia. Es particularmente ofensiva para Cuba y el mundo en momentos de una pandemia que nos amenaza a todos y cuando todos deberíamos estar esforzándonos por promover la solidaridad y la ayuda a quienes la necesitan.
But with more than 250,000 people now dead from coronavirus, is now the time to criticize medical missions which could save lives?
Let's talk about, there's more to talk about before I move on to Elon Musk and Vivian. Well, I do want to talk about Elon Musk in general. Jokes aside, you are the more apolitical between the two of you. You have a set of beliefs based on empathy and actual common sense for daily living. He's a reactionary weirdo, as every one of his convictions colored by reactionary political sentiment. Yeah. Oh, part of the reason why I'm interviewing a doctor from Cuba is because the Trump administration has taken new initiatives specifically to undermine countries that have good relations with Cuba and are they allow or they get Cuban doctors to come and help with healthcare in their countries. Now, there's a bunch of Caribbean nations that do this. Jamaica obviously is one of these countries, and Marco Rubio actually landed in Jamaica earlier today. And as you guys understand, here's the consent manufacturing machine. Caribbean leaders deny U.S. claims that Cuban health workers are victims of forced labor. But here it is. Marco Rubio landed in Jamaica aiming to spear Cuban doctors providing crucial free healthcare across the region. But the Jamaican prime minister shut him down, making it clear he had no right to speak for Jamaica or undermine the work of the Cuban doctors.
We are, however, very careful not to exploit the Cuban doctors who are here. We ensure that they are treated within our labor laws and benefit like any other worker. So any characterization of the program by others certainly would not be applicable to Jamaica. We are ensuring that our program complies with all the international laws and standards to which we are a party to.
Ironically, Marco Rubio is trying to change the international rules and standards. Once again, the whole purpose of this visit and part of the reason why I'm having this conversation with a Cuban doctor in particular is because little Marco is lying and is also actively trying to stop this Cuban doctor process from happening. On his first stop, the Caribbean, Marco Rubio arrived in Jamaica, intending to attack the Cuban medical brigades operating in the region, but at the press conference, the Jamaican prime minister, as you guys saw, shut him down.
Not about the provision of medical assistance. We have no problem with medical assistance. We have no problem with doctors. But
we have no problem with medical assistance, but fuck the doctors that offer it if they're Cuban. How dare you? Little Marco! Believe me, little Marco. Can we just, for a moment, acknowledge how wild it is to accuse the former slave colonies of slavery and exploitation? Yeah. And the reason why we are accusing the former slave colony of slavery and exploitation, okay, and then this also is like, you know, you can say this about Cuba and Jamaica both, obviously, but especially on the Cuban front, the reason why we're saying this is because they overcame a fucking brutal dictatorship that had not de jure, but de facto slavery still in their plantation structure. So it is wild that America is still not giving up on trying to be the biggest piece of shit in the room, no matter how big the room is, you know? Fantastic stuff. Thank you, America. Very cool. Very cool.